Good morning, all. Thank you all for being here. As you probably saw in your email, you're very excited to learn about the county clerk's office. How many were sleepless last night? Probably just me, right? Okay, very good. Well, my name is Shane Schoeller. I get the honor to serve as your county clerk. And we have a number of the office folks that are here today, so I will forego introducing everyone because they probably would not like me for that. But if they'll wave at everyone and say hi this morning, we appreciate them being here. Going to just really give you an overview of the office. I went back and looked at the past presentations. We hadn't really just given a full comprehensive review of what the office does. And so kind of start off with just the real basics, which is just for personnel alone. We just a little over $1 million a year for personnel in terms of the payroll. And then for operations, we're about 10% of that. So $114,000 we use for operations. And then you'll see the expenditures there. So that comes to $1,125,343. Now you notice the budget line down there for total office budget, 1.781. Now this is an off year. So next year, if you came back in and looked at that number, you're like, good Lord, what happened to this office? They've doubled their spending. Why would we double our spending next year? Elections, exactly. So Dave says it with a lot of enthusiasm there, but it does, unfortunately, take a lot of money to fund elections. So now let's just go through and start talking about the office itself. If this clicker, there we go. Okay. So it went back on me. Is it down? Okay, it's down. Okay, very good. So archives, near and dear to my heart. So we have Connie in here. She's the director of archives. And so she's an actual archivist. The county clerk myself is not an archivist. So she went to Missouri State University, got her degree, and really thrilled that she's been part of our team for a number of years now. And so she literally, every day, her and her team are working to make sure they're not only retaining the records, because a lot of the records in your office, our office, the county commission's offices and departments, we have to retain for a certain number of years. For example, the payroll records, those are permanent. I'm like, why would you keep the payroll records permanent? Anybody want to take a guess at why you want to have permanent payroll records? I see Amanda smiling over there. She knows. Because when you go to retire, if there's a discrepancy in terms of what you think you worked versus what loggers or serfs says, we're going to go back to your payroll records. And so we get that occasionally. People come back and with the payroll records so they can figure out what the retirement is. So that's one of the nice things that we do. We also have a lot of other interesting history. One of the big ones is Wild Bill Hickok. That's kind of a local favorite that people like to go down to archives and learn more about. Millie Sawyer's, that was one of the discoverers that Connie found since she's been an archivist, and that only became a newspaper article that then became a Willard High School production play, and it's kind of taken off a life of its own. They've got, what's the newest iteration of that?
The Millie Sawyer Center.
The Millie Sawyer Center. So a lot of neat things. And when you think about archives, you're like, well, that's just a lot of dusty paperwork. But I try to remind people there's a lot of stories within all that paperwork. A lot of people come to get their genealogy. They want to know what happened in their family. And so whether that's a deed or potentially a criminal record, they're going to be able to find that information a lot of times at archives that we store there. And that goes all the way back to the founding of the county, which is in the 1830s. Anybody want to guess how big Greene County was back in the 1830s? It went all the way up to where Crawford County's at. Oh, well, shoot. I had it all worked out. Like, who is the mystery speaker? Exactly. So sorry about that to everyone watching online. So anyway, so in terms of the, now I've lost my train of thought. Where was I at? Crawford County. So we went all the way up to Crawford County and then literally went all the way over to the Missouri-Kansas borderline. And so we took in a number of counties that probably well over 30. And then as the other counties came to be, we became smaller, but we have all the records for that territory at that time. So that's the archives division. And so now the most important thing for everyone in this room and anyone who's watching online is what? Payroll. When we last did this slide a year ago, the payroll for the county was at 1130. So we now have 32 additional employees. I didn't go back and look at it real in depth, but I'm going to imagine that's the jail. as we've continued to add employees there, to make sure that we don't have a shortfall. So we have about 32 more employees this year than we did last year. So the cost of the biweekly payroll is $2.6 million plus dollars that we have to make sure that we issue every other week. Important note, by the way, we always try to make sure the money's in the bank on Wednesday. Justin's here, I know he knows this. But occasionally there may be a little bit of a delay to get that money in the bank. We always encourage people, don't set your draws on the night, like Thursday night or even Friday morning. Give yourself enough time that if for some reason there's delay, that way that money isn't pulled out and then you get a late fee from your company or your mortgage company. So just a quick note to remind you about that, especially when we get the holiday periods, that can get really tough. And so always try to give a couple days delay for that. And then benefits, so just this last payroll period, $240,000 plus dollars in benefits for the folks that work here at the county. And of course, Sandra and her team, and of course, Sheila's a new part of the team. She's here. She joined us earlier this year. And so we appreciate what they do and how they do it. So tax admin, that's one of the more interesting parts of the office because we literally sit between the assessor, Mr. Johnson, and the collector, Mr. Isett. And so we kind of get pushed back and forth. No, I'm just kidding. So between the two offices. But so as we well know, Brent and his team is working diligently to get all of the valuations on your property, whether it's your real estate property, your personal property. They're working to get all that information. They're eventually going to come and say, here's the book. We don't want anything more to do with it, right? Almost. Well, then, if you don't like your valuation, it's not that you don't like Brent. You love Brent. You didn't like the valuation, right? And so you're going to go to the Board of Equalization and try to get an appointment to be able to appeal that value. So we do that during the month of July. And basically, there's a period of time you can set those appointments. If you miss that deadline, then you're not going to get an opportunity to be able to appeal that property value. That happens every year. That'll happen this year. And so we will literally, we're the secretary of the Board of Equalization. It's a citizen-led board. We work in concert with the city of Springfield with that board. And so we will hear citizens who are upset about their valuation. It's always tough when you have a neighbor who has that valuation appeal. I've had that happen before. And anyway, so then the BOE says, we think that the assessor's office was correct, or occasionally they disagree with the assessor's office and they will change it. And almost always it's going to be a change for less, not more. I don't know if we've had any valuations for more since I've been here as county clerk. So that's very rare if that happens. Then after that, we will then go forward and set all the books. And then we're going to set all the evaluations. Once all those valuations have been reconciled, we're going to send them out to all political subdivisions. So every city, every school, fire protection district, the county, everyone's going to get their valuations. And then they go about setting their tax levy. And so that's the part where they're going to meet. We do this with the county commission. We work in concert with the auditor's office, and we set the valuation for what the levy, we take the valuation and then we set what the levy amount is going to be for the county. Now, Greene County is not necessarily different, but not every county does this, in that we are driven half by property tax and half by what? Sales tax. So we're half and half. And so that's for both the roads and the county itself. So then, after all that takes place, we then take all the values, all the levies, and we hand it off to Alan and say, have fun at that point, right? And so then he takes that and sends out all the bills to everyone. So that's tax admin work. Julie is not here today, but she does that and does a really great job and is in her second full year of doing that. All right, sunshine request. That's another fun one. So we usually get more sunshine requests when someone is upset about something with the county. When people are fairly satisfied, we don't necessarily see a lot of sunshine requests. But there are periods of time where we can really be almost 24/7 responding to sunshine requests. Matter of fact, I spent the year 2018 almost entirely responding to one sunshine request after another. And then there was someone upset about a road expansion the next year. I spent almost another year responding to the request of, the expansion of one of the roads here in Greene County. So It can be driven sometimes just by personal interest, and sometimes it's just curiosity. Now that we have the transparency portal at the county, I think that has helped. We can drive people to that information. But we not only respond to sunshine requests for this office, we also do it for the commission and all the departments that work for the commission. Each of the offices is responsible for their own sunshine request, although we're always happy to help when those things occur. All right, so sunshine request. Then liquor licensing. As I tell people, I'm a teetotaling Baptist. My name is on every liquor establishment in Greene County because we have to put the liquor license there. As you can see, a little bit of revenue comes out of that. Last year we had about 1,200 licenses issued in the county. A little over $244,000 came to the county because of that. And so we also do the notary services. We're kind of the end of that. Starts the Secretary of State's office. We end it in terms of being able to issue that when they come in with their notary and their bonding paperwork. We take care of that end process. And then we auctioneers. So there's probably 4 or 5 more auctioneers than Billy Long in the county. As you can see, we don't do that very often here. And then I threw this in because we rotate some of the duties. This year, we're going to be, as county officials, meeting later on in the year to set the salary for us as office holders. And so normally the tradition has been that whatever, if there's any increase in a COLA for the county employees, we would get that increase. If there's a decrease, then we would mirror that as well. Any decision we make, it is not impacted until after the next term of our office. So you can't vote yourself a pay raise on the commission. You would have to get reelected before you could enjoy that pay raise, if that makes sense. All right. So voter registration, I see that we have Chelsea and Julie here, and Sharon is now back on the voter registration team. They do an amazing job just in terms of all of the work that they do, and I'll show you some stats here after that. But of course, you can register here at the county. You can register at any of the DMVs. You can register at any of the public library branches here in Greene County. We work well with them, and then you can kind of see. I won't go through the requirements for identification for registering. That would take too long. But one thing, if you have a young one who's 17 and a half, they're not quite 18, they can register when they're 17 and a half. So keep that in mind. That way, that if you come up to the day of the election, they're registered when the election hits. Because if they turn 18 on the day of the election, they register that day, they're not going to be able to vote to the next election per the Missouri law. So we try to remind people of that. And then just remember to keep your information updated in terms of your registration if you move or anything like that. So here's some more information for you. So last year was really a big cleanup year. We do our canvas at the beginning of the year where everyone gets their voter ID card. People are like, why do I get a voter ID card? Now they have to use photo ID. Well, we do it for 2 reasons. One, we want to make sure you still live where we have you on file. Number 2, we want you to know who your state rep is. If you live in a city, what ward you may live in, what school district you live in, what fire protection district you live in. All that information is going to be there in that card for you. So when you go to vote, you would take that card out. Now we now scan the ballots in. We have a barcode to make sure you get the right ballot, but you can still verify that with your voter ID card. Say, did I get the right ballot? You can use that information to compare. So those are 2 of the main purposes we use for the voter ID card when we send it out for the canvas. And then really elections. During the major elections, my first election in 2016, I haven't checked what happened in 2024, but we literally had 8,000 address changes that day of the election. And so, as you can imagine, for 80 polling location, that really adds to the busyness of the environment when we're out there on election day. So we clean up our voter records. The reason I mention that is last year we had 36,000 inactive voters. That means we didn't know if you still lived where you said you lived because we no longer had your address verified. Now we're down to 10,000. And so active voters, that went up too. And so we have 193,000 active voters. But in terms of total registered voters, we were last year at about 207. Now that we've cleaned up, we're closer to 203,000 active, or just total voters being active and inactive. So a lot of work goes in every single day to making sure we keep the voter registration roster clean. Voter registration process, as you can see, not only do you get registered, there's a 6-step application process that we follow diligently to make sure we're doing everything we are within that required 7-day business period that is in RISMO, the Revised Statute of the State of Missouri. We do quarterly canvases now, so we're now working with the National Change of Address Program with the U.S. Post Office. We're now making sure if anyone's moved, we then follow up now, say, can you verify this information? you can do it out of county, if you can do it within the county. We're doing everything we can to keep things up to date. And so then we do reports, and as you can see, we got the annual canvass or the biennial canvass every 2 years, and then you can see we also do petitions. So as an office, as a rule, we don't sign petitions because we don't have a conflict of interest. But anytime you sign a petition signature on there, make sure you do it legibly, because we're going to take that signature rate and compare it to what we have in your voter registration record to make sure those match so that we can validate that signature on the petition. Now the elections roadmap. So everyone kind of thinks about the county clerk's office because of elections. That's the most public-facing part of the office. That's actually a 12-week process from beginning to end. So we have 10 weeks in the outset to prepare for an election. I tell people it's kind of like preparing for a party, and I see that in the sense of if you've ever had a party and you have like a little gift you give everyone as they leave the party, our gift is the ballot. We want to make sure when everyone shows up they get the correct ballot. And so a lot of prepping and planning goes into that. So we begin preparing that election plan even before the 10-week period. We get as much information as we can gather. We then set out recruiting election judges. I know a number of folks, maybe even in here, have served as election judges. If you have, we are grateful for that. It makes a big difference. We then go to laying out the ballot. We then have to get that ballot coded. We then have to bring that ballot back. We then have to test that to make sure it's reading properly. We'll do that before we even open up absentee voting. And then we will begin to set a time to test all of the equipment, all of the machine. For example, in 2022, when you had the U.S. Senate race that was open, because of the number of candidates were running for the U.S. Senate between the Republican candidates and the Democrat candidates, it took us 25 hours to test one machine for the county itself. So for our absentee machine and for our central polling locations, one machine took 25, because we had 12,500 ballots we had to scan. Why do we do that? Because we want to make sure that that machine is logically and accurately reading that ballot. If it's not, then on election night, we could have real problems where we go to report the election results. So all that work is done, and we do that with bipartisan teams. We work with citizens through our Republican Senator Committee, our Democratic Senator Committee, and then people who may not be affiliated. They work to help make sure that we are working together to test that equipment. And of course, we always do that with bipartisan teams. So all that's happening before the day of the election. Then, of course, we train election judges over the Public Safety Center. And then we're finally ready for the day of the election. And so on that day, we're out there on the polling locations. We're also finally able to then run the absentee ballots. So all the absentee ballots that come in, they cannot be ran until election day. 5 days out, we can open. We can do all the things we need to do to prepare them, but we cannot run them. And all that's done by bipartisan teams. We have a whole chain of custody process that follows that to make sure that everything's being done properly. Then hopefully on election night, all the results are going to be reported out. This last November, you may be like, why did it take so long for Greene County to get the results out? Because we now scan a digital image of each ballot that's cast. And so that's one way, if for some reason something ever happened to the ballot. For example, one county years ago, Mississippi County, there was a race that was in contention for a recount, and the courthouse got burned down before they had to recount. You never know what's going to happen. That's a true story. So it's nice to have that digital backup image, because then we could go to a judge. Judge could say, yes, you could use this, or no, we're not going to let you use that. But at least we have the potential option there if we had to do a recount, because we don't have the physical ballots. So again, all of our process is done through accountability, through both parties. If people don't like it, they can go to the judge. They can petition. If the judge agrees, they can then order a recount, or they can say, no, we don't agree. We think everything was done properly. All of those are to make sure they're safeguarding the integrity of the election process. All those laws are there to protect you and every voter that votes, and of course, even those who don't vote. So then redistricting, of course, 2022 was our big year redistricting, but this last year, we still have adjustments we have to make. We did 363 address changes. Chris is not here. He succeeded Madison being our election coordinator. And so he's been doing those adjustments here for the last about half a year here. And then you'll notice there that in 2024, we had 179 candidates file. Like, oh my word, that many people ran for countywide. No, this is central committees too. So if you look at that number, it includes the central committee folks for both parties. And then you'll see the cost. This is where I mentioned to you the budget's going to double in 2026. Just the election cost alone in 2024 was $1.5 million and some change to be able to manage the election. So I kind of talked a little bit about it. We always make sure we have a paper ballot, talking about misinformation, election integrity. We have chain of custody processes. That was really improved at the 2020 election when we had a lot more ballots sent in to us by mail. We were able to look at our processes, be able to use what we learned from that, be able to learn best practices from other counties and states that have a much higher volume. We have, I think, a much better process than we had even in 2020, thanks to that experience we had during that year. And then, of course, we're always manually recounting. After every election, no less than 5% of every polling location is going to be manually recounted. And so those are drawn by bipartisan teams in terms of what precincts will be counted after the election. A verification board or two bipartisan, one Republican and Democrat, draw that on election night. And then literally 2 to 3 days, sometimes a week, depending upon the size of the election, we'll have bipartisan teams in there literally hand counting. They'll randomly draw the races and or issues that are going to be hand counted, and they'll do that together. And so we'll do the same test after the election we did before the election. So I mentioned that 25 hours we had to test before 2022. We had to do the same thing after the election too. All those things occur. And then we try to do everything with the community. When we chose our election equipment in 2018, in 2017, we had the community come together. They helped inform us in terms of the equipment we were choosing at the time. That's why we have the equipment we have now, along with the scoring process. That information was really helpful. And then we also, when we redesigned our elections website, we had people from the community come and give us input before we launched that live. So we always want to do everything we can as we're serving the public to make them involved in the process. Then let's see, that's almost the wrap there. How am I doing? Doing okay. All right. So if you want to become an election judge, as you know, the county is gracious enough that you can work the day of the election and not have to take a vacation day to do that. So we always appreciate folks that are willing to do that for us in terms of being out there on the day of the election helping us. What questions can I answer for anyone that has any this morning? And did I leave anything out, team? Anything that was critical? All right, good. Yes, Amanda.
Not critical, but talk about annexation real quick.
Annex, yes,
And how
okay.
that affects the-
So you saw that those address ranges of 363. A lot of times that can be because like the cities will annex in property. For example, one of the biggest annexations happened in the city of Springfield. They usually don't do a lot of personal residences, but over off of the FF or the West Bypass and Republic Road there was a number of apartments there that got annexed in this last year. So those are examples of where we have to make sure and have those before the election day begins, because now they're going to get a different ballot now that they're in the city versus when they were in the county. And so a lot of times, though, it's going to be business annexations, but nonetheless, for example, we also do what's called community improvement district elections. Those are normally elections by mail. However, and in those elections, they're voting, for example, it has to do with the taxes of that district. They will be able to capture back a part of those taxes to put back into the district, like up on Commercial Street. Well, sometimes when they do that, only property owners are going to vote because no one lives there. But we have to go through and make sure there's no one actually living on those properties, because if there's one voter that's living on those properties, guess what? They get to be the one vote. The property owners don't actually get to vote. This happened up in Columbia a few years ago, and it actually went to court because they were trying to, there was a lot of coercion that took place, and it was a student. It was the most interesting thing if you go back and Google that story in the Columbia Tribune. But we haven't had that happen in Greene County. So in those elections, annexation and all the things that happen with those happen because of the way the properties are being annexed in the property, and then how we conduct the election is all determined by that as well. So, yes.
As far as active voters and inactive voters,
yes.
How does your office determine where they flip that switch from, hey, this is an active voter, to, nope, he's inactive now?
Great question. It's because we'll send you something in the mail, it bounces back to us. And for example, the post office could say, hey, we've got an updated address. We're going to follow up with you and say, can you update your address? If you don't update the address within 30 days, then at that point you become an inactive voter. It also happens a lot with people who like to winter. So they'll go to Arizona or Florida, a more comfortable climate during the winter, where they'll have their mail forwarded. So then we send them for example, the voter ID card in the mail. Well, voter ID cards don't get forwarded in the mail. Bounces back. We then follow up with them and say, hey, are you just basically, can you fill this information? Is this your new address, or are you still retain your address here in Greene County? If they ignore us and don't respond to that piece of mail, they then become an inactive voter. And then sometimes they like to vent at our election judges on the day of the election when they get back in April, because they're upset about this. So we try to remind them. So if you ever get a piece of mail from us asking us to update your address, it's preferable you do it then, so that way you don't become an inactive voter. Because, for example, you may have lived at the same address, never voted. As long as that voter ID card gets to you, you would be considered an active voter. So the terminology doesn't fit what you think when you hear inactive versus active. It really all has to do with whether or not your address is
There's
confirmed.
no consideration made for voting in elections if they haven't voted in 4 elections in a row.
Not in our state. Other states have gone to that. There was legislation in the past in our legislature that has considered that, but currently we don't have that.
Shane, can someone opt out of receiving a voter ID card? What if I feel comfortable that I can figure out where I live, what ballot I should have? I don't want you to mail my information out. Could I say, please don't?
No,
Okay.
because we have to make sure that voter ID card makes your address. Because, for example, we do have people who register to vote. If that voter ID card comes back, then at that point you're no longer deemed eligible to vote. So that really impacts college students, because sometimes they forget to put their apartment number and then they don't get their voter ID card. And so we learned that 2018 when we had the central polling location MSU. So we've done a lot of work at MSU to help remind students, put your number of your apartment or whatever when you're filling out that address card, so that we make sure that gets to you. So good question, Christian.
Are you limited with how many central polling locations you can have?
Yes, we have up to 5. So, and we appreciate all our partners, both Mercy and Cox, MSU, and then of course the CU Transit Center, and then right here at the courthouse. Anyone else? Oh, Caleb's part of the election team. Oops. Chris isn't here, but Caleb's here. Sorry, Caleb. Yeah.
Shane, on the Board of Equalization,
Yes.
I just throw out a lifeline to everyone here in the room and anybody they know. Not just for that board, but for other county boards. If anyone knows anyone that they would think would be a good appointment to one of our boards,
Oh, yes.
please let us know. We do have a vacancy on the Board of Equalization, and that board, you can kind of explain what the requirements are, but we need somebody with commercial experience.
Yeah, so especially people who have real estate experience right now, especially commercial, those are the folks that really add value, because everyone brings different talents to the BOE board. Some of them are appraisers, and so they bring that talent to the board. Other do residential real estate. So all of that comes together. Then we have just some people who are just business owners who come in with just kind of the business owner mindset as well. And so those talents really help the board. And currently, we're a 5-3 board. 5 are from the city, 3 are from the county. What's interesting is that if there's anything outside of the city limits of Springfield, then only the 3 members of the county can vote on that. And so we're the only BOE board that is actually created this way in the entire state. Most of them are created with the county commission, which I'm sure you're glad you don't have to do that as a commissioner. It does get a little confusing, but you don't have to make people mad if you vote against them. So anyway, that's right.
Yeah, we could take like a banker, we could take a realtor, somebody ideally with commercial experience, but even somebody who just has a bunch of rental property. They'd have to
That's true.
themselves on theirs, of course, but
right.
we do have that one vacancy, and it has been hard to find somebody.
Yes, and because it's, you get what, $25 that the commission reimburses for each meeting, but it's a fairly selfless effort in terms of coming here once a month, and then during the appeal period in July, they could be here up to almost 21 days, I think, total in terms of the calendar that they could be here. But Brent's office done a great job of trying to meet people beforehand. They are down at the election center now, and they work with folks who are like, I'm not sure I like. So they will try to work with them beforehand to try to whittle that number down, and so that helps out a great deal. But if they can't come to an agreement, that's when the BOE gets involved. Anyone else? I bet. Oh, are we all right? Am I over my time, Cindy? All right, very good. Thank you guys very much.